Supercommunicators is a modern day term that I recently came across in a book I read by the author Charles Duhigg. The book is literally called Supercommunicators. Now, this term may sound really fancy and really out of the average person's depth, and it almost makes you think like, do I have to be a superhuman, as the word suggests, in order to be a good communicator? Well, what I have done is I actually had to read this book 2 times in order to get a good understanding of this concept of supercommunicators, why it's important, and how we can apply that in modern times when we're communicating not just as individuals, but in particular healthcare professionals. So in this particular video, I'm going to dissect the aspects of what stood out to me in the book Supercommunicators, as well as some of the not so good parts, in my opinion, some things that could have really been improved on in this book, and just some of the takeaway lessons that you can learn about communication through this book as a healthcare professional. Welcome back to my channel, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me every single week and your ongoing presence, attention, and support. My name is Shweta. I'm the founder of Healthy Dynamics. This is a coaching practice that helps healthcare professionals who are from English as a second language backgrounds, who work with patients on an everyday basis, who either are based in an English-speaking country or work with patients who are native English speakers, and you're looking to not just improve your English fluency. You do speak English at an intermediate level, but you want to go beyond that and want to look at ways in which you can communicate. There's a big difference between being fluent in a language and communication. I talk about this on the channel all the time, and you are aiming for that. What are you want to equip yourself with the skills that will make you a good communicator in order for you to connect with your patients better, build trust with them, build influence, authority, impact, and ultimately get good reviews, recommendations, testimonials, and referrals. So if you fall under that category, you absolutely come to the right place. Now, I have to admit, I'm not much of a reader. I always tell myself that I need to read more books and I need to, expand my knowledge base and just get off social media and all the other ways in which we distract ourselves and get more sunk into books. So it's very rare that I pick up a book and I start reading it, especially like a hard copy. However, this book just caught my attention, and obviously, because Charles Duhigg, who is the author of this book that I'm going to be talking about in this video, which is Supercommunicators, he was a journalist as well as he worked in the corporate world for a very long time. And the reason why, or how I heard about him, is because he's featured on some of the podcasts that I listen to regularly, so Dr. Chatterjee and Mel Robbins. So I can again leave those episodes in the description box below, and also the link if you want to actually purchase or have a bit of a read about what Supercommunicators is. So this video is not a book review per se, but I have to admit that is originally what I wanted the video to be. I wanted it to be a proper book review, but then again I felt that really detracts from what I focus on this channel, and I didn't really want to go off track. So I picked out certain bits and bobs in the book that I felt to me that really stood out, as well as things that I felt that Charles Duhigg could have either changed, expanded further on, or elaborated further on, as well as this very concept of supercommunicators and why its pros and cons in its entirety. The book essentially is about communication in modern times, and what are the ways in which we can communicate in a way that is both impactful, empowering, shows emotional regulation, emotional intelligence, demonstrates curiosity. Everything I talk about on this channel is what this book covers. Now, what does the term supercommunicators mean? It describes a specific set of people who are able to communicate effortlessly. They are able to have difficult conversations, express opinions, facilitate discussion, form friendships and relationships at work and otherwise, and also able to negotiate and convince people. Now, and I don't want to start the video off on a bad note, when you hear the definition, anyone will think, this seems really far-fetched. Am I going to be able to do this at all? Is it something that I will be able to achieve? Is it something that do I even want to achieve that? Of the drawbacks that I really saw in this book. So almost like you are idolizing this concept of super communicators and the assumption that everyone has to be a super communicator in order to be considered a good communicator, and it's almost like a hallmark or a benchmark of success that everyone has to aspire to, without considering the fact that communication is a process. It consists of repetitions, routines, rituals, things that we do on an everyday basis, and the more you practice it, the more you get better at it. And no one is going to be perfect. No one is going to be like a superhuman in communication. Even though I coach people in terms of communicating, there's a lot of things that I mess up when I'm communicating with people. I'm only human, and as is everybody else. The important thing is that you have to reflect on what is it that you are doing well, what is it that you are holding back in, what is it that you can improve on, and how exactly you can do it. And when you coach with me as a client, that is something I emphasize heavily about it with the book. It was a good blend of art and science. It really emphasized the fact that communication is a blend of both art as well as a science. And he really does talk about going into things like when you are in sync with one another. So what that means is when you click with somebody and when you're synchronized with one another in terms of the topics that you're talking about, or just the vibe, quote unquote, as you call it, how your neural pathways are aligned and they're synchronized and things like that. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but that is again something that I found really fascinating. Can really make or break your relationships with other people. One of the things that he does mention really well in this book is that all of us are hardwired to communicate. Whether we do it well or not doesn't really matter. Every single species, whether you're a human or an animal, whatever it might be, every living being is hardwired to communicate. And not only in some cases communication is essential for survival, for us humans, we are tribal beings and we thrive in communities where we have good relationships, where we have a good support system. And the fundamental aim of communication is for you to connect and build a relationship. And that is exactly what even my coaching really talks all about. I felt that this could have been explored a little bit further on. It was just very one-sided in the sense that he only talked about this aspect that you have synchronization. Fine. But then what happens is if somebody's reading the book and they're like, oh, am I expected to synchronize with every single person that I see? No, it's not going to happen. And if you're not able to synchronize it, there was no real guidance on how exactly you can get better at it. This is a problem that I experienced in reading every part of the book, where the how really was not covered in this particular area, not everywhere else. And one of the things that also I really liked was be very clear about the end goal of every conversation. Now, for some of us, it could just be to connect. Now, your end goal in this case might be you want to see the patient back again. You want to get a good glowing testimonial or review. And what are you aiming to achieve, and how you are going to get there via your communication is broken down really well into steps. And he provides a little bit of a framework which covers both the practical as well as the emotional aspect of every conversation, be it at work or otherwise. I'm going to leave those screenshots over here for you to check out and just read that in a little bit more detail. He also really emphasized on asking in-depth questions, demonstrating curiosity for deeper connections. And that's something that, I do talk about on this channel all the time. Yes, even though you are in healthcare and you have to be professional, at the end of the day, you are human. And demonstrating curiosity is one of the surefire ways in which your patients can really trust you and they can really turn to you and relate to you. And relatability is, again, something that he mentions quite a bit. And he ties in really well this concept of asking in-depth questions with the emotional aspect of how we feel or how we are hoping to feel or how also the other person feels during that particular conversation or those stage of conversations. Now, one thing that I found quite fascinating is that this is something that I have not explored very often on this channel, but it does come up quite a bit in communication, which is this concept of matching and mirroring. So this is something that is quite misunderstood. We think that matching and mirroring is you just literally, you talk if say you're in conversation with a patient, for example, you could be a GP, you could be a pediatrician, whatever it might be, and say, for example, you have someone who's the patient is telling you exactly how they're feeling. What you might think that mirroring means is that, so you might clarify and say, okay, I think, so let me just clarify, this is what you're saying to me. While that's not entirely wrong, that becomes quite monotonous, and that's not the only way to match and mirror somebody. Matching and mirroring really is on that you match not just what they're saying, but also their mood, their gestures. You lean in and let them lean in a little bit. So really looking at things like how you hold space. I've mentioned that many, many times, how to hold space for your patients as a healthcare professional. That really what he refers to as mirroring and matching, which has been explained really well in this book. And the 3 pillars of communication, which he talks about over here, again, that was really, really well covered. The purpose of every single communication or conversation is to either make decisions, get to an agreement, and evoke some sort of an emotion, and also the fact that different parts of our brain are activated in different forms of communication. And also the concept of miscommunication was covered in a lot of detail and quite well. What is it that you are, what say in the case of a healthcare provider, your patient might be expecting something, and the healthcare provider might be providing something else. So say, for example, you might go to a psychiatrist or a psychiatrist you might be seeing a patient as a psychiatrist, and what they may be looking for is someone to really validate and understand and hear them out as their concerns, instead of what you might be thinking is, okay, I have to just prescribe a pill or give some medication. I'm not saying that that's not necessary. In some instances it may be very, very important, but that assumption is that disconnected assumption was a huge major source of miscommunication. And 4 rules of learning conversation, again, that was covered really, really well, and and this again ties in really well. Another thing that really stood out for me was the example of a surgeon, how he transformed who worked with patients, because this, again, that's what I talk about on this channel all the time. So this particular surgeon who used to work with patients who had prostate cancer, and when the diagnosis was made, he just made the assumption that every single patient wants to have surgery. Every single patient wants to have that as a last resort treatment. And then Charles Duhigg shares, how he eventually, through patient reviews and things like that, and the feedback that he got, how he was able to explore, sort of deter out of that and explore the ways in which making sense of how his patients were feeling, and asking those questions and getting his patients to open up, where they shared, what they want their life to look like, what kind of lifestyle they want to lead, and how they don't want to just jump into surgery straight away. So that was a part of the book that really, really stood out for me. And it also, again, taught really well about providing objective advice and options for patients, and for them to help make a more informed decision, which is what this particular surgeon learned out of towards the end of what transformed his communication completely. The importance of navigating through conflict, again, and he gives many, many different examples of how conflict is inevitable and should be embraced and should be welcomed in many instances as well. He gives examples of things like what happened in NASA and Netflix and all of these other corporate organizations. And also looking at the concept of vulnerability, which was amazing. So to what extent should you be vulnerable? How much vulnerability is necessary to build deep connections with the people who you are communicating with, and in many ways also why vulnerability is like almost a non-negotiable or a mandatory part of it. So this is just a rundown of what were some of the things that the things in the book that really stood out for me. But some of the downsides I've already mentioned, the one in the very beginning. The other thing that I would say is that I would have really liked for him to share aspects and examples of his life that made him write this book. So yes, he uses a lot of examples, like in different organizations where, like I said, this particular surgeon, someone working in Netflix, someone working in NASA, and in the CIA, for example. All of those are very good examples, don't get me wrong. But when he went into that in too much detail, that's the reason why I had to read the book 2 times, because it started to get quite dry and boring for me. But had he used examples from his own life where he failed, and I had to do a little bit of research on this a little bit later, that, he failed in the corporate world, he failed in many aspects as a journalist, and what he learned about communication through those roles. And if I had seen more examples of that, I suppose I could have related more with him as an individual. Don't get me wrong, those case studies were important, but I felt this is another aspect that he could have covered a little bit more. But overall, this book is not bad. If I was to give it a rating out of 5, I would give it like 3.5. Just the case studies, when he went on and on about them, that can be a little bit going off track about what the book is really about. I would like to see more personable stories, as well as not using being or aiming to be a super communicator as his holy grail. Just look at it as another example, or you can cherry pick bits and bobs of whatever it is that you find relevant and apply it in your everyday life. And I will be making more videos on the different concepts that were covered in this book in the future, so go and check them out either over here or on LinkedIn to stay updated on my future videos, which is your shorts as well as your long form videos. Make sure that you hit the subscribe button, the notification bell. I'm going to leave Charles Duhigg's TED Talk on Supercommunicators in the very end of the video. And let me know if you've read the book and if you're intending on reading the book and what your thoughts on it are. And as always, thank you very much for your time, attention, and presence. I shall see you next week.